So, as we're coming to the last day, a bit of possibly a recap for what we did and how we approached this weekend, because some of you came for all the days, some of you dipped in one day, some of you came for 2 days. And so I myself thought, well, how did we start off? And I think the thing that seems where I'm mostly known in the mindfulness world is she's the body teacher. So people are very much aware that I work in a way where I seem to have, due to my own life history, in fact, gone very deeply to explore my body and how I could bring that into my in those days therapeutic work as a body-centered therapist, and how it still informs my work when I see people in a mindfulness one-to-one, when I supervise people, when I teach people, and when I teach mindfulness. So we started off to see that our body really carries our patterns. And we're often not aware of these patterns of thoughts and feelings. And originally I trained in the work, in this body work from Wilhelm Reich, which worked a lot around energy in the body, so referring what we would call prana in the yoga, or ki, or which is very often used in Eastern medicine, and he called it organ, that energy. And he was interested to see this flow of energy in people, and when these people were suffering with their psychological structures, and that it could be seen in their bodies. There were areas in the body that were differently colored. There were areas in the body where there was more tension. And when I speak to my osteopath, he says, in England, they are very, very strange with people being naked. Those of you who've been in England know that. So I think if you Danish people go there, you will be in for a bit of a shock. So you don't go into a sauna and are naked. You wear your bikini or something like that. And so he got in some trouble, and somebody took him to the court because he worked naked. Obviously, you can keep your trousers on and so on. But supposedly, you have to cover the person all the time. And then treat them under the towel. And he said, but in this work you need to see the body, because when you touch areas, when you move them, the way how they respond to your hands, it would let you know about the tensions in the body and how to work with the body. He won his case because he could really verify it. But it is a black mark on his reputation in England. Wilhelm Reich, obviously, in the 40s, 50s, he ended up in prison because he was, I think, far ahead of his days, and he got possibly really a little bit mad because nobody could understand it, and he worked with people in this way, and that made so that was then taken up in possibly, and that was the day where I would say, yeah, when I trained in that, it was similar. You were naked on the mat and you had to scream and shout and all that stuff to access areas that were in you. Anger, often after anger, deep sadness came. Sadness could be a pattern, and then you needed to access anger. But it needed to be in the body. So the teachers worked very strongly with body. And then later on in the Hakomi body-centered work, the guy had worked also more in that sense, but also more in Gestalt therapy, the late one Kurtz. He became interested in systemic work and had done Buddhism. And he called his body-centered therapy Hakomi. That comes from the Indians in America, the American Indians, from the Hopi Indians, and it translates as, what is the world you are living in? So are you really seeing the world, perceiving the world that is in front of you, the interaction with the person you're having, with your work colleagues, with nature, or is it the world that you are seeing? So is it the perceiving, is it true, clear, or is it shaded by your ways of seeing? And he developed this work, how to handle that and to help people to become more aware that we might look at the world from our perception and not therefore see the world as it is. And in both cases, Wilhelm Reich and the late one Kurtz, they saw when a child is developing themes arising. And those themes arising in that development of a child, and there will always be issues arising. That's part of living. They would have an impact on the body structure. They would have an impact on areas where the muscles might be overused or underused, where there might be held tensions. And the themes they looked at that were shared themes for our human development was, the first theme was obviously the eyes, around the eyes, they said, because the first step is you are born in this world and you want to be loved, you want to feel safe. And they said if you were born and you came into a world, and they gave even the example how kids were born in those days. Light, harsh light, they were handed, they were immediately hung up on their legs, so they were clapped on their backs. So quite a harsh welcome into this world from that very warm area in the womb. So the assumption was that all of those, that there was already quite a shock for that system that until then was flooded with nourishment and was quite safe. Obviously, we know nowadays the circumstances of a mother will obviously, in fact, have an effect on her hormones, and therefore even that can have an effect on the child. But all that can get reversed. That's the good news. No? So when the child is born, and when the handling is kind, when the voice is kind, and when there is a lot of eye contact being made. So therefore it's a bit concerning. Recently I saw a father walking his little child, and this little child was really lovely, chatting to him about what happened at school. And it was like, yes, did you? Yeah. And I thought, this child gets quite a strong message. You're not as important as this thing. I'm not looking at you. I'm not really listening to you. So this child, possibly in a very subtle sense, and that will happen on a cellular level. This child might not be able, because it will not put a point on one specific incident. It will just have a feeling sense about how it was, of a slight disconnection, possibly. It might just have been a one-off, but I see it so often nowadays. I hear from mothers being proud that they go back to work and they're breastfeeding and they're typing on their computers. And what you normally see is and I don't mind breastfeeding or bottle feeding, but not to make that time to, can you see how the baby constantly looks up there? Constantly, all the time. And it needs that contact. Doesn't matter if you bottle feed, breastfeed. And I don't see that very often happening. And again, in England, they are mad. In the public, lots of women are asked to cover the baby. So the baby can't see the mother. So, and that is so essential. And that carries on, obviously. So the baby in the pram, the fashion that prams are later on, that they turn the kids away. They say that's not good. The child needs the face of the parent, so the child feels safe by seeing the facial expression of the parent. So they said, so we can see it's not only the time when the child is born, but it's quite for a long interaction that the child needs to see the caregiver, and that is the entry into this world. And if there is already so much happening, then there will be blockage around the eyes. So we might notice that in a receptive way, either the eyes get very fixed or they pull away because there is some response to that experience. But that is so early on, we will not notice that. No? But it will obviously have an influence. And the recent research I read 2 years ago, which was also interesting, they had photographed people, actors who did different emotions. And then half of the group of people were shown, so they split up a group. And both of these groups were shown these photos of people's in emotion. and half of the group had been given Botox, or they were Botoxed for their own choice, and the other half was not being Botoxed, no, these injections. And the people who were Botoxed could not read the emotions. Whereas the people, because they obviously filmed the people to see what happened. So they were shown angry faces, sad faces, lots of faces. And then they were asked to give it a name. So write up what they thought what that emotion was. And the people who were Botoxed could not do. But they noticed is when you look into somebody's face, you have a very slight way of mimicking it. No? When somebody smiles, you smile. When somebody's sad. So there is a very subtle, they call it now mirror neurons, where you mirror. And therefore, again, you get a feeling what that feeling state is of that person. And as they couldn't do that, as they couldn't use their facial muscles, they couldn't access which emotions they were dealing with on a much lower level. No? So obviously they knew that was anger, but there was more subtle emotions that they couldn't access, whereas the people who had not been given Botox, they could access them much better, because in a very subtle way, they had access it, so their emotions had really, where the building blocks to the emotions were their body sensations. No? So we can see how important that is for children to see the face, because that's their entry into the world. So the first theme for quite a period is that it feels safe, and it feels safe by seeing the parent's face. No? And then the next theme was about nourishment. Obviously, again, very for those days in the 50s, there was often a very timed nourishment and so on. So there was obviously quite clear incidents about that theme, but it was not only feeding, it was also, again, that nourishment of talking to the child, handling it, being available to it, reading with it. And again, you notice sometimes parents who don't do that anymore, and they know in England they have done research and they say the language skills and the words, the amount of words kids have nowadays is going down because they've been sat a lot in front of television. But so they get all these children programs and so on. But they need really, again, that human contact where they had been talked at, so that interaction. No? So around that theme of nourishment, then in both cases they noticed there was the two tendencies. One person would try to use to facilitate nourishment, and that would be played out in their body structure. So the person would develop a body structure that would make other people come to them. So it would be a body structure that would be slightly more collapsed, and the eyes would be very big and round, and you sometimes you could nearly sometimes feel. I had sometimes clients where I really feel they were empty and they were sucking the life out of me. And as a counselor, that is okay, because you only see them for an hour. And I think that's reality. No? When they said to me, "Oh, you're so nice and you're so nourishing," and I at one point had to say, "Yes, but I'm with you an hour. I'm not with you days and weeks and years," because that can be very, very draining. No? So we have people who can facilitate that, and it's not wrong, but they are stuck in that belief system, I cannot sustain myself, and therefore everything in their body, in their behavior, in their words is a bit more like, really? Do you mean? And there's nothing wrong about it. But you need to remind them that in a way they're stuck in a pattern and they cannot access a resourcefulness. No? And that might show up often also what we see as, I can't do that. No? So when you teach them meditation also, it's far too hard, I really can't do that. No? So and then you need slowly to encourage them and say, just try a minute longer. And the other type is then the person who says, this is so painful, because you can see that it's very painful. that experience, because when you don't get the nourishment that feeds into your belief, there is no nourishment. So it is a very painful strategy to survive, but it might work. But for some people, I was one of those, it was so painful to be so visible that you wanted nourishment and not always being given it, that people develop another type, and that is, here we go, I don't need anything. No? And I can work my ass off, but I will never ask. No? And I will feel, I will never ever ask for nourishment till you collapse, obviously. And then it shifts into more of an anger. Nobody supports me. It's only me has to do all that stuff. So that is also a defense pattern to feel your lack of nourishment. So the theme in both cases, therefore, is nourishment, but how we handle it is differently done. No? And so these are the people. I mean, looking back, I know I couldn't even sometimes ask for the toilet. That is really mad. No? So I remember when I visited people, I worked with them in yoga in their homes, and I went there, and I really needed the loo. And I couldn't ask for the loo because it was like I was asking for something, and I might have made them uncomfortable. And that is obviously behind that. Your parents, for reasons you don't know, or your caregivers, cannot give you the nourishment. So there is sometimes also that underlying sense, if you really want more nourishment, it's your mistake, it's your fault, you put more work on your parents, and you shouldn't do that. So I was sometimes shocked, no? And I went into the car, and as soon as I could stop somewhere, I weed in the bushes. No? That is ridiculous. Or when some people ask you, you're starvingly hungry, and then they ask you, and they say, "Oh, do you want a piece of bread?" And you are on autopilot and say, "No, I'm fine." And it's nearly like you don't want to be a burden, because to some extent, you were not a burden for your parents, but it could be your parents' life. You conceived that they were on the edge of being able to nourish you, because we tune in very well. No? So the pathway then is really to which is very hard for those oral nourishment compensated, for when we are there, to really notice that we want nourishment, because that's so hard. We don't want that. No? And the person that is very comfortable in facilitating nourishment, they really need to see it is there. There is nourishment. They just might not see it. And that was played out in bodies in very different ways. So the I don't need is much more stiff, no? Is much more uptight, is much more in that area, whereas the other is more softer. So the body structure was really playing that out. So if you look at the seal, no? Or young animals, everything is round, and the eyes are round, and the mouth is round, and so there is a facilitation, and that, in some extent, is played out in the ways how we use then our bodies as well. And then the next thing was about independence, that people want to move away, they want to explore the world, and their body structure is then, for some kids, they were not allowed to move away for various reasons, because that parent needed that attachment to feel safe. No? And you can sometimes see that. We had a child from the neighbors, and in the early ages, yes, it was really very adventurous, and it looked over the fence, but the parent and the grandparent, they had agoraphobia, so they didn't they didn't like to go out a lot, and the child was constantly pulled back. It was constantly pulled into the house, and slowly it really developed that attitude not to go out. No? And for some, it's even harder. You can hear from people's stories where they might feel guilty. No? I know somebody whose brother was older. He was happy when he could leave for university. He was left with a mother that was severely depressed. And the father was always on journeys, always out to work. So he felt extremely guilty to go to school and to let his mother be. And his mother would often write him sick notes so that he could stay with her. And for him, there was a sense, if I really follow what I want, if I go out, I desert her. I let her alone. So that sense of moving out so that is a physical sense often of a stuckness, because there's one impulse of moving, and then you slowly develop an internal impulse that pulls you back, and that often plays out in a sense of stuckness, no? That is, you do it, but you do it slowly, or you do it reluctantly, and you never like to be pushed by other people. Never, ever. I had a boyfriend like that, and when I said to him, come on, hurry up, that was a sure way that he wouldn't hurry up. Mm-hmm. And that was his way to say, I'm still me. I'm still have here some freedom. I do what you tell me, but I do it very reluctantly. And therefore they could save a sense of self, of, okay, I have to give in. So can you see that? It's really lovely to see. I think sometimes when you have those people, you stand in a long queue, and the longer the queue, the slower they work. No? And you don't push me. If you push me, I do it slower. And that is their sense of freedom, where they could maintain a sense of their individuality. And that's important. We work on dissolving the I, but we have first to understand the I before we can then release the grip of the structure that is around us. And others develop what was in the old days called a psychopathic pattern, a very blown up body, so like psychopath, mafia boss. So they would trigger a lot of fear, but that was their way to protect themselves when others had brought fear into their lives. And they therefore developed a sense of bringing fear into other people's lives to stay, again, to feel safe. Yeah? And it's often that we were always told, you could imagine it's like a balloon, very blown up, and if you put a needle in it, it would really drop down. So the true sense of these people, in fact, is they are very vulnerable. They were pushed and pulled. They were under very powerful parents, but therefore they learned to be more powerful with other people, not to experience that again. So, and you know that, no? You know, and they said again in that type there was even two types. One was the charming one, no? So you would get your way when you were going along with them, when they were charming and so, but when you're not well towing the line, then the charm was gone. No? And the other was just very powerful. You wouldn't dare. No? So I think when I see films, I think mafia bosses, but look at companies and stuff like this, you would see that. But again, the body would play that out. No? That blown up, or that stuckness, that you don't move me. And the last pattern was more a pattern of being seen in as valid, as lovely that you are here, and so not the baby, but it's lovely that you're there. So that was in the old days called hysterical enricher. So for the girl to be seen in her independence and valued as her own person now, equally to the boy. And they said there's again two patterns in both genders. One, to be seen, would have become a very restless, agitated way, which then can pull you in. So it's nearly, they gave the example, the child comes home from school, has a lovely drawing, and her parents are not very interested in that. No, they might be schizoid parents. They might be the parents who never felt safe in the world, and now they have a vibrant child they have to deal with. So they might pull back a bit. And therefore the child has to make more noise, they called it. Mom, Daddy, see what we've done in school. Look, nah, cook, look. So she would facilitate a sense, or he, where she would try to draw the attention in. No? And we might have friends, and I had a bit of that pattern, or some people said very strong, that pattern. So it can be quite theoretic, like in theater. You really draw the attention in of people. No? But again, it never ends, because you get the attention, but only because you are so loud and make noises and do all that. And deep inside is still that worry, would they also look at me if I'm just me? Would I still be seen and acknowledged and validated if I'm just me? No? So that is the under theme. And again, in our meditation practice, there is this healing component where we turn to ourselves so that we can give us this act of seeing. So all what we are talking about, we deal with when we sit on the cushion and when we move, so that we see those patterns arising. No? And another way of dealing with that validation as a whole, as I'm proud to have this son, I love this daughter. So more about that, letting them all not be in there. They've reached a stage where they say, when you're 7, you really walk, you are out in the world there, but you still need that validation, approval of your parents. And the other was called Richard. And that is the person, when the house is on fire, that's the guy who's carrying the water buckets, no? Always working hard. So very reliable, always there, always the one to go to when you need some extra help, always there. So they get that approval and validation by when they ask for one other person to do an extra shift. Yes, I can do it. So they always put themselves forward, because then they get validated and approval, they get liked by the others. No? But obviously the costs are very high, they can lead to burnout. And again, a deep inside insecurity, because you always wonder, do they really like me for who I am? Or do they just like me because I'm the one who will change the shift? No? Oh yeah, this weekend I have some friends coming, can you do my evening shift? And I notice I know that pattern in my own life. And I had a friend who has an organic shop, and sometimes one of the salespeople didn't turn up, and then he called me, and even when I was very tired, I wanted to be liked by him, so I went into that shift, no? Even if I was tired. No? And there was this underlying sense not ever wanting to disappoint him, because then there would be the fear I would lose that being liked by him. No? So there's a lot of a very insecure sense. Can I relax? So for these people, a big theme is relaxing. Can I really relax so deeply that I really know I'm loved for who I am in the deepest sense? And so in this, those people are also, they have much more activity because for all what they have to do. No? And there's again, they hold you all the time. No? They can't let go of you. So that when I had a friend who was this hysterical type, and you hardly could move away from her, because she added always one more story in, one more story in, one more story in. And it was like you were going to the door, and the person was still talking to you, and you really felt guilty to say, look, I really have to go. Yes, and then again. And then, so you can see the underlying theme is, in a way, to assure that attachment. And therefore, again, a deep, deep pain, because we cannot relax deeply when, as children, we did not have that sense, whoever I am, first I'm loved. No? I might have done something wrong and that needs correcting, but there is this insecurity that whoever you are, and by then we have developed our ways of talking and being, but that unconditional love, that sense is missing. No? And that's when we turn to us, that we want to turn to us with that unconditional love. And that's often what we don't notice. No? We either end up in dialogues or we drift off, but and that feeling tone is so important. That's why ever really lost in dialogues, really to drop into the body and ask, what's going on here in my body? That's when I spoke yesterday about tensions in the mind bring tensions in the body. So tensions doesn't mean it's judgmental. It just means holding on unconsciously into this belief patterns affects the tensions we have in the body. And that affects obviously also how we live in this world. And therefore it's helpful when we have a lot of churning in the head. They're hidden in that, then it's good to go to the body and sense where it's affecting the body, and then sense also what kind of emotions might be in my body that I need to approach. With that leaning in, so with what was missing. And I can guarantee you, as I said on the first day, we do all get things wrong with our kids, really. No way round. So I think that therefore either hopefully they will do something like what we are doing, or they will go to counseling. So I think it would be good if they speak to us if we have children and say to us that was really not good, that we can at least say to them, I'm really sorry. I know in my generation my parents couldn't do that. I was told it's all fantasy what I experienced. It was totally wrong. And despite neighbors confirming it, bank accounts confirming it, my brother was the prince, and it was always felt, but I was always told it's a fantasy. And till the last day, my mum, but I could, due to my own practice, I could really understand she couldn't do it. She couldn't do it, and she repeated a pattern from her family life. 4 girls, 1 son. Wow, he was the king. Yeah? He got the company. He got the big money. The girls were supposed to marry a good man, and their relationships broke down. But so she just repeated unconsciously a pattern that she had experienced. So I think that's our work, that we can see and feel some of the issues in our body, but we hold them kindly. And to hold them kindly, that's where the awareness comes in. But that awareness for me is a warm awareness. And sometimes the emotions become very strong, and when we become over emotional, I felt it always very, very useful. That then it becomes dangerous. We see that nowadays, that over emotioning, everything is emotional. So it's also good when we had, sometimes tears might come in a meditation practice. Sometimes we have a week where we feel like a stone. Very useful, because I read one Christian monk says, the hours when I felt the stone and the awareness of feeling like a stone was in fact the process of opening up what was inside that stone. No? Because when we notice we feel like a stone, nothing touches us, we feel really disconnected, we feel cold, sometimes even cynical, but when we really acknowledge that pain of not vibrating with life, not moving, neither with our life nor with other people's life, that in itself is so useful. But I found that sometimes very helpful. That there are times, even when this talk today, it might not touch you. You might sit there and think, oh, that's rubbish, that's too emotional. And that is part of that process, to notice that we might at times feel really, really closed. But approaching it then, so there's closeness. How does that feel like? Not judging it. And I think the last step was, therefore, I always felt beneficial for my own processes, and when I work with others, that always check in with body. I always check in with my body so that I can access something. And slowly our body is really releasing these patterns. They are still in me. I don't think ever I will become a psychopath. I will have traits of it, because we have all the traits, but it seems in my environment and with my nervous system, they also acknowledge you're born with different nervous systems. Some children are born and they are hyper vigilant already, no? And then you have other children, they are so placid, no? Really, this little big round thing, and they're so placid, and others are like this, no? So we bring definitely conditions that also, well, obviously that's why often you see two types, no? Because even around a theme, one will facilitate you to the conditions they brought in and the conditions they had themselves, their nervous system, their muscular system. They then will respond and develop, and therefore we do not judge it. In my training, we obviously judged it. No? Nobody wanted to be that, I need nourishment. No? We all wanted, I don't need nourishment. And that could be part of our culture as well. No? And it's so lovely when the Zen monk Thich Nhat Hanh speaks about interdependence. You have to work through your difficulties on your own, but people are there supporting you alongside of you, and you're influencing each other. So I think it's a wonderful word, and I think he created it because there was only dependence and independence, and to create that interdependence. And that is in fact what my yoga teacher, when he speaks about the body, he says when you look into your body, you want to feel how everything in your body can move with more ease. It can coordinate each other better. It works together. And that's why when I teach, I use some, as you may have noticed, of the Feldenkrais work, which really works just on that finding variations around the same movement that bring us back that ease. And that's nearly a way that it teases people back into their bodies. Because we are often not in our bodies anymore to that extent that we really feel those subtle things. And that is, for most people, a really pleasant experience. And I think that's sometimes what we need, a bit of sugar. Yeah? A bit of sweetness. So, and I think that is very, very well provided by the Feldenkrais work, that awarenessing and that noticing that even if there's a minimal movement, that movement can become even more free, more easy. And suddenly we really start to smile, as if our cells smile because they are released from that fist, from that gripping. But we all know the teachings are not only about going for the pleasant, no? They are about recognizing what is. So we work around, we in the Feldenkrais work and in the yoga work, we also notice when something is unpleasant, and I think in the Feldenkrais based work, I'm not a Feldenkrais teacher, I just incorporated in my work. They would definitely always say, don't do anything that takes you into some discomfort. And I think that is a good starting point, because when we haven't been doing with our body, either the body is a stranger to us, or we had a relationship with the body which can be quite hostile. Yeah? Working on it, making it differently, pushing through. That is also not really being with your body. Yeah? It's a different way. Okay, you are with your body, but possibly more in the very harsh, judgmental way. But there is a point which we started yesterday, possibly more, when we went into yoga postures, where we're noticing that we have to stay very close with the perception. And it might be a bit uncomfortable. But we know if that discomfort is something we can breathe with, and therefore a deeply, deeply held pattern in the body can relax. Because by not reacting to it, by really breathing with it, we develop that calm presence, like the mother being there with her child, the father, the carer, if it has fever, if it is in this terrible tooth, that calm presence to whatever shows up. And that brings the healing. But we obviously need to know where is the point when we stay in that position, where might we even be able to stretch a bit more, or where might we need to release the position. But the release happens, the responding happens by non-reactivity, by just perceiving it, by just sensing it, and often breathing with it, that experience can change. Because we access that deep non-reactivity, and that experience can really change. It can suddenly, there can be an open up. In that physical open up, sometimes an image can arise, a word, or later on. But that is the skillful working where we acknowledge that it is a process where we are with the pleasant and the unpleasant in that very skillful way, in that being. And then we at one point might be able to draw into what we call awareness. And that can be a point where we feel very spacious. And again, just look at the skeleton. How much space there is in a way, no? How much space, and even the bones have space. So in a way we are space, we are just not so much aware of it. But that can happen, so that we are in a posture, and strangely there might be a feeling, it's a bit uncomfortable. It's not painful, it's just a bit that we feel something of a deeper tension that we can't access with massage or stretching is there. And then we breathe in it, and then that tension might release, or it might stay there, but we are not reacting to it. We are staying with the breath, and that is that strengthening where the mind pulls back into consciousness. So when the mind gets entangled with the outer world, and that includes our body, includes our thoughts, includes our feeling, and all the senses, then the consciousness, when it moves out, we call it in the yoga practice, it becomes the mind. And then the mind gets entangled with it. And then it forgets that its home is here in awareness. But so it is this movement we are doing. And that is like a coming home. And that's when in that moment we are free from fear. We're free from all those things. We just feel nourished, we just feel present, we just feel held. But the danger is that we think we want always to be there, but there's the world around us. So we rest in this place and then we re-engage with the world. But the re-engagement becomes slowly, has an anchor here. No? It's a bit like an elastic. When we open downstairs the door, the key is on an elastic. So I guess so that people don't take it. So it was nice to see Christine pulling the key out, unlocking it, and then we were made sure that the key goes back into its home. Yeah? And then we closed it. Yeah? And that is where we would say in some traditions they speak it, that's your true home, that's where you go back to. But obviously you go out, that's fun, that's pleasure. The world wants you. Yeah, the world wants you. In Indian stories, that's how they speak about it. They say the god Brahma, who is called the creator, he was in deep sleep, and in his body was the whole universe. And he got bored because it was all in him and he could not really see it. So they said then over 7 days or so, with every out breath, he created the world. So isn't it interesting also how there's always these similarities in different traditions? So he created the seas and all that stuff, and then the human beings. And it was purely for him to see the richness that was in him, the beauty that was in him, now outside, so that he could see it. No? And possibly he will be sometimes a bit in tears what he sees. But and that is again when there is this speak, but that's the freedom we were given. No? So we are there, so we are totally connected. And they say, in fact, with one in breath, he can take it all back in. And then with the out breath, it can get recreated again. And they counted, I think, in yugas, where I think one blinking of your eyes is thousands of years. So it will take quite some time till he is breathing in again. So we are still safe in our lifetime. He is not yet breathing us in, but for us to remember that link, that we are coming from that held space, no? That is, and they say we are now on the Kali Yuga, and Kali Yuga is often seen as the dark ages. So they say there was a time, very similar, where people lived in paradise. So he had created, and everything was really, people were happy. And then slowly our mental activities came in, and power struggles. And it describes the Kali Yuga exactly as it is. People do not trust anymore, and they steal, and there's war. So when I read that the first time, I thought, oh, that's good. So some sages, some wise people, thousands of years ago knew that this would take place. And for me, it was quite reassuring that, okay, everything is according to plan. Might not like it, but and they describe, which I thought is nice, when it was paradise, it was like a cow standing on 4 feet. So that cow was really, really stable. And then slowly more, so everybody was grounded in their ethics, that we are still being given, non-harming, non-stealing, and so on. And then slowly, with every yuga, one leg gets off. So now we are living in unstable times because this poor cow is only standing on one leg. So again, and we might still struggle with that idea that we should stand on, luckily we stand on 2 legs in most cases. But that, I found it still very reassuring. I thought, okay, it's just a description in those scriptures what we are experiencing. No? And I think then at one point, obviously, he breathes in and everything dissolves, and then he might breathe out again, and then everything gets recreated. And therefore, we can also see the link nearly when we do our breath observation. No? Breathing in and breathing out. So every moment is a moment of creation. And can we celebrate that as he did, as Brahma did? And I like stories. They speak to me because they speak on a different level. So, but it's interesting to see that in mystical traditions, there is often similarities. And we can take it even again back into psychology. When a small child begins to develop independence, it will move away from the parent. And you can see that very lovely in playgrounds. And in fact, you know, if an attachment is safe, because then the child will move away. But it will come back. So we can see that sense when I spoke about hysterical rigid, there is such an anxiety around that attachment that they have to make a lot of fuss to secure that connection with the parent, to feel there is an attachment. But underlying, obviously, is that insecurity. So when the kids start to move, they will move away. But again, you might know that research where they asked some mothers to sit on a bench with these kids, and then the kids were running to their sandpit and so on. But they noticed that the kids occasionally, they would very slowly increase their radius. So they would move a bit away and come back. So to make sure that they always were linked to their source, to their caregiver. And it would become longer, they would walk more away, and they would stay longer away. But they would always come back. And that was their secure attachment. And then they asked the mothers, when all the kids were playing, to go to a different bench, just next. And all the kids got really, immediately, when they saw their parents were not on that bench, they looked around. The bench was next, so the stress was really not too bad. And the kids were immediately all first running back to the mothers or fathers. So they had to secure that attachment again. And then they went off again. And in a similar way, that's what we try in the yoga practice, but our attachment is really to that divine energy. Because there is nobody anymore in our life that can provide that. And even our parents could not provide that 100%, and it's possibly to be born, as we know, to be born. We experience dissatisfactoriness, but there is a different level where we do not experience it. And that's where we want to dip our toes in, and sometimes we can feel that just one session where we feel so at peace and everything seems to be there but not affecting us. But it's not an aversion, we have to be very careful. Some people think, oh, I've touched that, I want to stay there. No, we are breathing out, we re-engage with the world. But we might always have one foot in there, or part of our awareness can access that. So that's the practice we're doing. And again, I think it's very interesting, as some of you know, I lived for 7 years in a Christian interfaith community with my family and some monks and other people. And I always was bothered about that story of the lost son, the parable in the Bible that the father has 2 sons, and I think one of them asked to get his heritage paid, and he goes off. No? He leaves. But the other stays and works hard and really deals with everything. And the other has the high life, no? Women, drink, everything, and he spends all the money, and he lives in poverty and sleeps in the pig stall where the pigs are. And then at one point he remembers that he has this father and his family. But he's a bit doubtful because obviously he's taken his estate, his heritage, and he can't ask for more. But his life is so miserable, so dark, so smelly, so stinky, so lonely. So he dares to go back. And news come to his father that his son is coming home. That's why it's called the lost son. And the father is calling everybody and says, my son is coming home. Put out the best cloths, wash yourself, kill the pigs, make a big feast, get the best wine out. And the son comes in his dirty, stinky clothes, and the father is hugging him and saying, welcome, son, wash, make yourself fresh, and I've laid out my whole table for you. And when I heard that, I thought, this isn't fair. There's this other brother working all the time, and it exactly that is so nice in that story. Then the other son comes and says, I've been working for you, hard working, I've done everything you asked, the good girl. I've done everything you asked me, and I worked, and I never complained, and I was your good son. And you never, ever, nourishment, no? You never, ever gave me such a feast. I mean, I'm totally this son, no? That was my life. I always work hard, I never make problems, and you never make a fest for me. And my brother comes home, and he spills his marriage and everything, and he gets a feast. So it was really nice. And I think that's why I could see. I always was astonished. And then it was nice, which interestingly I always forgot about. The father says, I love both of you equal, but this was my lost son, and he has come back. But you do not worry, you are also my beloved son. And I thought that was so nice, because it was not nearly like what we want to do in the yoga. We want, our lost soul wants to come back. And then there is something waiting in us, a rich table, a really rich table. And I must say, I still felt a bit. But I guess that's more my structure, because if I would have been the other side, I would have said lovely, and obviously I guess he would have then started to work, and we don't know what happens. No? But there was still that sense, but you still didn't give me my festive tea. And I think that's okay, because when you bring humor into it and so on. But so I think that's the journey, and we started again and again. So even when we have been in that place, touched upon it, as I said, there might be times when it's lost again. We feel like stone, but we will remember it. Like the lost son, we remembered. And he took the courage to go back. And he was not judged. No? Possibly I would have first punished. Hopefully not now anymore. I would be, you got yourself into this mess, you first sort it out. So I think we can see their tendencies, and so that's the background to what you're doing. So we're not only moving the bodies, we're not only sitting in silence, we're really taking that human journey back to our source. And sometimes we miss, no? Sometimes we can just remember, but the dedication for the practice hopefully is based on that knowing. In every tradition, there is teachers, books that remind us of that. So for 7 years, I was very privileged to know more about the Christian tradition because we lived with Christian monks there, and to hear these stories and to get possibly a slightly deeper understanding where they sit. Good. So with this, we can. Are there any questions? No. I think you're ready to move.